Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the launching of the Opening the Archives Dominican Republic project. Let me see if I can put this. So my name is René Cordero, or René Cordero, and I'm currently a third-year PhD student at Brown University, as well as the coordinator for the Dominican section of the Opening the Archives project, which we will explain in a minute. But before starting to delve into everything, I want to take the time out to thank some key people and staff whose support for this project would have been impossible without them. So I first want to thank is Professor Jim Green, the director of the Opening the Archives project, but also a mentor and one of my advisors. This literally would have been impossible without him. It was his idea to integrate the Dominican Republic into this project as we transitioned from Brazil to the Dominican Republic. Yeah. I also want to thank the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, CLACS. Particularly, I want to thank Kate Goldman, who has been so patient and efficient in putting this event together. Oh, thank you so much. That's awesome. A little more. That's good. I also want to thank Director Patsy Lewis, which has been invaluable as well in giving us the opportunity to do this. And I also want to thank the History Department for their generosity. And furthermore, I want to thank my advisors, Jennifer Lamb, Daniel Rodriguez, and Evelyn Hudehart. I really would have been lost in all this PhD business if it wasn't because of them. Now I want to take the time to thank the Brown University Library, particularly, I don't know if she's here. Oh, thank you. I don't know if she's here, but Ashley Champagne. She's been amazing behind the scenes working with the website, as I'm going to show you in a minute. And finally, I want to thank Iman Jadala. I'm not sure if she's here either, but Iman is the one who manages our researchers when we go in the summers to collect these documents and make them available for scholars. And of course, it goes without saying that I'm infinitely grateful for the people that have come today to offer their insights on the importance of Dominican history. These people have traveled far and wide to come and give a talk. So before we get started with our speakers, however, I want to offer a few opening remarks. First, I want to describe what the Opening the Archive project is and what is its larger goal for both the production and facilitation of knowledge. Second, I want to give a short tour of what this archive looks like and give you some insight into how we expect scholars will use the website. Lastly, I want to get at why a digital archive of the Dominican Republic's experience during the Cold War is so important. Why should we care about studying the Dominican Republic during the 20th century? And what lessons can we glean from it? So first, the Opening the Archives Dominican Republic project began about 2 years ago. It became a splinter from the first Opening the Archive project that documented, or that still documents, U.S.-Brazilian relations during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This initiative sprang from the need to document U.S. relations with the during the Brazilian dictatorship. The sources come available from different archives across the country. For example, the Lyndon Johnson Library in Austin, the College Park Archives in Maryland, and also the John F. Kennedy, Library in Massachusetts. Opening the archives will serve the academic community by making it easier to access documents without having to travel to the archive. But equally important, it will serve the broader Dominican population that is so curious about their past. There isn't a better place than Brown University to house this project. Dominicans in Providence number a little over 5% of Rhode Island's population. So as historical narratives become so important for Dominican Americans and Dominicans in Dominican Republic, opening the archives allows for a more intimate engagement with neglected episodes in Dominican political history. Now, how would someone using the site be able to engage with this history? The documents cover a wide range of broad themes, such as military intervention, humanitarianism, political disappearances, and economic trade negotiations and foreign aid. For example, here is how a search would look like if you use the resource. So this is the cover page for when you enter into the website, right? If you click here, you'll find a description of what will you expect in the archive, as well as a historical overview to give you a sense of what you'll find there, right? But what's pretty neat about it is that, let's say you want to search something, right? So let's put, for example's sake, Joaquin Balaguer. Oh, sorry. Oh, all right. Thank you. Okay, now it works. Right. So here we have some interesting documents on Joaquin Balaguer, right? We have, for example, the disappearance of Guido Gil and the continued detention of 12-year-old Jorge Puello. Guido Gil was a famous journalist in the Dominican Republic who was murdered because of his organizing of La Romana Central. It was a big sugar company. And so what's really cool about this is that once you're here, you have these ideas, this section of broad themes. In the broad themes, you can, from Guido Gil, which was a member of later became a member of the Movimiento Popular Dominicano, you can click on Movimiento Popular Dominicano, and it will take you to other documents of, for example, the alleged disappearance of MPD members. All right? And so on and on and on you can go with thousands of documents. You can just follow the trail. So let's take a look at one document, for example. Let's take a look at alleged disappearance of MPD member. Here you have the full view of the document, right? And I'm not going to read the document, of course, for time's sakes. But you also have the citation of the document. So you're not going crazy looking for how to cite when you write a paper or an article. And you can take this citation and just paste it on the footnote, right? So these are just some examples of how you would use the Opening the Archives project. And what we expect in a couple of years is to have over 50,000 documents made available for the public, right? I think throughout 2 summers we could only scan and index 8 boxes, and just in the College Park, Maryland archives for the years 1961 to 68, there's 41 boxes, right? So you could already imagine how that's going to work. Now, lastly, so I want to leave a lot of time for our speakers. Why is this initiative so important? Well, first, as many of you know here, or anyone who has visited the Dominican Republic or have done research in the Dominican Republic, every Dominican thinks he's a historian. They all have different versions of either the same story or the same version of different stories. It comes from a storytelling tradition, actually, in the Dominican Republic. But the point is that you could encounter a taxi driver, a nurse, and they would all have these versions of their history. No? And not to say that any of those histories are invalid. It's to say that I think with something like this, it can complement those storytelling traditions, right? And Dominican history is quite contentious among both people in the Dominican Republic and its diaspora. And one of the most disputed histories is the post-Trujillo era of 1961. For this reason, the Opening the Archives project focuses on 61 to 78. Among the controversial themes during these years is the reign of Joaquin Balaguer. popularly known as Los 12 Años. During the Balaguerato, it is estimated that about 4,000 Dominican young people lost their lives, either because of direct or extralegal repression. Not to mention the thousands of others and hundreds of others who were disappeared or tortured. Second, it introduces distinct actors to the field of Cold War studies. By making these documents readily available for research, we delve into a very understudied terrain of the Cold War. The Dominican Republic stood on a hemispheric crossroads. On one hand, there was the reverberation and inspiration of the Cuban Revolution. On the other hand, there stood an empire to the north, ready to invade at any threat of social disruption. Therefore, what we get is a unique historical narrative of political mobilization that sought to negotiate between these two spheres. Third and lastly, this project serves as a memory project. Opening the archives goes in the tradition of other Latin American memory projects, like that of Chile or Guatemala, where the archive acts as a vehicle for both social and personal subjective transformation. What was once a state project for the surveillance of the population now becomes a tool and strategy of resistance by not allowing us to forget, and therefore create more just futures. But enough of my take on this matter. Some of our speakers have traveled far and wide. So the first person I want to introduce, and who will start us off on making sense of the importance of Dominican history, is Professor Robin Derby. Professor Robin Derby is associate professor at UCLA, and not to mention a graduate of Brown University for her undergraduate degree. Now, many of you might know Professor Derby from her award-winning book, The Dictator's Seduction: Politics and the Popular Imagination in the Era of Trujillo, which, among other prizes, won the Bolton Johnson Prize for the Council on Latin American History. But what she may not know is that I actually encountered Professor Derby through a lesser-known article titled, quote, "Gringo Chicken with Worms: Food and Nationalism in the Dominican Republic." It appeared in this edited collection, Cultural Encounters between U.S. and Latin American relations. This article, which grappled with the question of what it means to be Dominican in an age of accelerated globalization and market deregulation during the late 20th century, was what actually inspired me to become a historian. The way she used sources and asked questions about time periods that historians usually neglect encouraged me to take up similar approaches and topics. Professor Derby's current book, entitled Werewolves and Other Bêtes Noires: Sorcery as History in the Haitian-Dominican Borderlands, is based on 12 trips to Haiti and the Dominican Republic, where she collected oral testimony of demonic animal apparitions like the Bacá, for example. So without further introduction, I would like to welcome Professor Robin Derby. Oh, you want to come up? Yeah, yeah. Come on.
Got the PowerPoint. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for including me in this event. This is really, it's just a moving experience, and I'm just so thrilled to be a part of it. And of course, thanks to René for including me and all the other organizers of this, incredible archival project. An historian of the Cold War has described its impact in Latin America as causing dramatic conflict, shocking military violence, and torrential bloodshed, concluding with massive economic trauma in the 1980s. Particularly after the 1959 Cuban Revolution, Latin America became a key theater of superpower contest. Latin American states learned to be excellent tacticians, maneuvering as clients, skillfully securing U.S. support, and using it to their advantage in ways that often entailed stifling domestic repression in the name of fighting communism. Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo, who lasted 3 decades in office, forged a regime that has been described as totalitarian, and became a textbook example, as did the less studied, enigmatic Joaquin Balaguer. Trujillo courted U.S. diplomatic support through, among other tactics, actually bribing members of the U.S. Congress, and when he needed allies in Washington, as he did after the brutal slaughter of ethnic Haitians in the border in 1937. The Cold War was a period of grand dreams of social change and heroic resistance as well. The Dominican Republic is an important case study for the Cold War, since it suffered not one but two U.S. interventions, the one in 1965 unfolding right in the heart of the poor barrios marginados of the capital city, such as Capotillo, where U.S. troops had trouble discerning the spatial organization of the shanty towns. Even children were enlisted by the resistance, playing a major role, passing messages and hiding family members. The Dominican Republic also played a central role in the waning days of the Cold War as neoliberalism emerged and international agencies pushed for free market reforms. In 1984, which is right as I was poised to go to the DR for the first time, popular protests exploded in response to the International Monetary Fund's shock treatment in Santo Domingo, as the price of food and medicine skyrocketed threefold overnight. This level of This level of popular mobilization is surprising given the fact that this period was one of continuing military juntas and massive repression in the Southern Cone. The Dominican Republic came to take the lead in the Latin American protest against the IMF during the Latin American debt crisis, which was occasioned by declining revenues of the price of sugar, coffee, and cacao, as those prices tanked and oil prices and interest rates surged. Yet the Dominican Republic stood up to the IMF in the first debt interest payment strike, joined later by Argentina, Brazil, and others. No wonder the classic anti-imperialist ode, Ariel, by the Uruguayan writer and Jose Enrique Rodó, found its first republication outside of South America in Santo Domingo in 1900. Indeed, the Dominican Republic was a veritable crucible for the Cold War, and I'm thrilled to be here to help celebrate the opening of this important public archive. But it's also important to remember that making public archival evidence in itself is not enough. Sources can be deceptive. As photography critic Teju Cole reminds us, for example, the camera can be a weapon of imperialism. Indeed, the kinship between photography and violence is apparent in the very term shooting with a camera. The image on the poster, there we go. On the poster for this event by Juan Terero has become iconic of the Dominican view of the 1965 intervention due to the way it so effectively conveys the raw anger of Dominicans losing agency once again at the hands of U.S. troops. But U.S. photographers told a very different story. Relying upon the imagery of the emotionally resonant child to convey the intervention as a humanitarian effort with the simulacra of care, their pictures, by contrast, showed troops playing baseball with Dominican children and distributing powdered milk to eager civilians at food distribution sites. The emphasis on childhood is also evident in one of the few images of those killed, which includes two children in a shared coffin. The multiple references to powdered milk is particularly deceptive, since the troops arrived as Santo Domingo was in the midst of a 9-month drought, which most painfully affected the capital city. So it's not clear how much milk was actually drunk that was brought. Yet the figure of the innocent child could not be a starker contrast to the seething man, as these sources convey two very different stories. I've found that oral history can be a very effective way of probing behind the archival record and getting at what anthropologist Ann Stoller has called its inner hidden pulse or affective states. Human rights has been a key theme in my work, as it should be for anyone who studies the Dominican Republic. My path to becoming a Dominicanist started at Brown University. A development studies major in college, I got involved in anti-apartheid work and spent a year abroad at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, which was a hub of African socialism at the time. It was also a center of black radical thought, since Guyanese political theorist and activist Walter Rodney had taught there. And there I received my first exposure to Marxism and socialism. But my true political awakening occurred when I got a job in D.C. on the eve of Ronald Reagan's re-election in 1984. I had an internship at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which was a hotbed of unemployed Democrats as they challenged Reagan's militarized approach to the Contra War in Central America, which was fueling massive carnage in the region. I got caught up with lobbying activities against Reagan's policies. I was hired to edit a book on Central America that provided an alternative to Reagan's strategy of militarization, and I discovered the long history of 20th century U.S. intervention in Latin America. I decided that I would learn Spanish and return to D.C. to lobby against U.S. foreign policy. My career as a Dominicanist actually commenced with an Arnold grant from Watson, which is this building. I received from Brown to go to Haiti, where I studied gender and migration, and where I discovered the Haitian massacre of 1937, which became my first large research project. And since it was nearby at that time, I traveled to Santiago, the second city of the Dominican Republic, to learn Spanish, where I developed a fascination with Dominican popular culture after doing a lot of interviewing with survivors and participants on the 1937 massacre. I became fascinated by the particular penchant for eloquent storytelling that is so deeply embedded in Dominican popular culture, and I've been chasing Dominican rumors and tall tales ever since. My Dominican friends say that it's a sign that I was to become a Dominicanist is the fact that my birthday is Dia Duarte, in honor of the father of independence, and that my initials are RD. But the truth is actually a little more serendipitous. Even if my teaching has been heavily involved around issues of U.S. intervention and its local impact, I've approached political violence obliquely in my work and from the ground up, in part due to my fascination and commitment to oral history as a source. For example, while classic texts on the Trujillo regime had focused on frontal political assassination, my oral histories revealed the everyday trauma of other forms of more covert violence, such as the anonymous pasquines and denunciations officialized in the pages of El Caribe newspaper, in which reputations were shredded through anonymous rumors, which, while often untrue, trashed reputations and created a climate of terror, since these authorless crimes could not be effectively challenged. I've also written about a particular kind of what others have termed a hermeneutics of suspicion that developed during the Cold War period of authoritarian regimes as a byproduct of the fact that the U.S. was a major actor shaping events covertly in a context in which information was scarce, often due to the lack of free press. This is the perfect context for popular conspiracies, such as gringo chickens with worm rumors or the chupacabras to bloom, and I've been intrigued by the logic of secretism, the talk around and about official secrets in the context of sparse information. This particular kind of discursive space is an indirect byproduct of the Cold War, of course, but a topic that at times gets left out in the shadows due to the moral necessity of chronicling the front lines of political violence. The Cold War brought heinous and often casual state violence to Latin America, but I would like to make the case, I'm behind here, for the necessity of taking not only a frontal approach to documenting and interpreting it, but also to take note of other forms of violence that take place off stage, to record more ambiguous contexts and situations that get beyond the Manichaean moral framework of clearly defined heroes and villains, which structure many resistance studies. I've learned about these more subtle and often unseen forms of domination through oral interviewing, which has helped me to get closer to people's experience. For example, one of my key informants for my Trujillo book was Francisco Beres, whose uncle was Archbishop. I'm actually ahead here now. In the 1950s, and his father was on the Supreme Court. And it was his visceral paranoia which cued me into the particular form of terror that regime insiders faced. And it was his sister Divina who indicated to me the importance of La Feria when she pulled out her scrapbook and lovingly related to me her role in it and who were all the people in the pictures that she had so carefully saved. That's what made me realize that many previous scholars had what they'd seen as window dressing for the regime was actually deeply significant, since Divina clearly conveyed to me that participating in La Feria was the high point of her life. Thus, I owe the chapter in my Trujillo study on La Feria to a chance conversation with Divina, because she revealed to me how important it was in her popular memory. Of course, I study archival records, but I've also learned that getting outside of the archive can help reveal the emotional significance of events. But talking to people is not just enough. The traditional oral historian records interviews and transcribes the texts. But in the context of a former slave society, I would argue that one needs to get beyond the public transcript and collect fugitive speech forms as well, hearsay, rumor, gossip, because these are what Sarah Ahmad would call objects of emotion, conveying the emotional intensity of events. Terrero's photo is a great example of an object of emotion, since it palpably documents rage, but also spreads it, since you cannot help but feel his anger when you see that image. You certainly need to collect popular narratives told in the light of day, but you also need to collect backstage speech acts and crosstalk, such as gossip. As an oral historian, I was trained to transcribe and work from texts, but today I go back to the tapes and I'm listening more closely to the voices, because that's where you hear the emotional timbre of events. I learned this by accident when I had to return to my recordings when my book was coming out in Spanish. It was published by the Dominican Academy of History. And I had to capture the original Spanish wording, and I was at times shocked at my informant's tone of voice. I had an interview on Columbus Day of the Quinto Centenario with Don Leon Ventura of Pamasola, the religious community that was slaughtered in 1961, and he was literally shouting at me in the recording. If we want, as social historians, to trace effective economies, there's so much more emotive data in the voice that is lost in the cold transcribed page. This may be even more so in Spanish, since the subjunctive tense, which is the tense of desire, is used more commonly than in English. Unsanctioned speech forms, the flourishes, the anecdotes, and the inadvertent details can reveal so much. And in the Dominican Republic, popular forms of speech, such as banter, jokes, stories, are high art. Human rights work in Latin America has focused on state violence, which is crucially important, of course, but we cannot forget the cost of what Rob Nixon has called slow violence, which might include environmental deterioration, among other topics. The new film Isla de Plástica by Cacique Films ponders the massive quantity of garbage that is accumulated in Santo Domingo, which of course is toxic and harms people and the oceans alike, and is a scourge for the poor, especially those who live on the banks of the Osama River in communities such as La Ciénaga, which are on the front lines of climate change. The UN has listed Santo Domingo, the capital city, as one of the top 5 cities expected to experience catastrophic climate change by 2050 due to rising sea levels. It's even more at risk than Port-au-Prince. As Elizabeth Delugri has written in her timely and important new book, Allegories of the Anthropocene, waste is an unintended archive and one that we can use to chart another dark side of the extractivism and crony capitalism that has developed such a stranglehold in the Dominican Republic over the past few decades. Nor is this a new story. Haina, which is about an hour west of the capital, was a site of gold mining pollution in the colonial period and has been referred to as the Dominican Chernobyl, since its population has the highest level of lead contamination in the world due to a battery recycling factory leak, a powerful reminder of the dark underside of the toxic waste economy, which has been a byproduct of first world economic growth, which second-tier nations, such as the Dominican Republic, swap toxic waste for debt relief and cash. And some have described this as the neoliberal outsourcing of risk. Dominican artist Tony Capellan, his art installations offer a powerful critique of the choking of poor neighborhoods in Santo Domingo with plastic detritus. That's Mar Caribe, one of his signature pieces. Myself and others have spoken out against the 2013 ruling La Sentencia and the elimination of birthright citizenship in the Dominican Republic, which has caused a human rights catastrophe on the island. Legislation which is scapegoating a population like those killed in the Haitian massacre, citizens with several generations in the country who are being used to deflect from issues such as rampant trafficking and drugs and corruption. I actually have written a number of essays, and we have a book coming out in Haiti on this topic, because although it's a topic which has had a lot of attention in the DR, there's nothing on it for the past 20 years in Haiti, and Haitians are wanting to think about this anew. This is not a new story, since anti-Haitianism was deployed as a screen similarly during the Trujillo and Balaguer periods. But one of our key arguments is that anti-Haitianism, while often taken to be a cause of the massacre, was actually a byproduct of it, as citizens sought to impart meaning on an otherwise senseless event under conditions of state terror in which they felt they could be next. This archive is particularly exciting as a Dominicanist because the Dominican Republic is often cast as a phantom country within Latin American studies, one that gets ghosted, as Dixa Ramirez calls it frequently, either because it's seen inaccurately within a U.S. racial prism or because it's such an outlier within the sugar and plantation society paradigm of Latin American studies due to its particular history as a nation of predominantly freedmen so early on. By the 18th century, and one that was not defined by sugar plantation monoculture, but had sugar only in regionally isolated pockets. Rather, the animals brought by Columbus, the pigs and cattle, created a feral animal commons that enabled plebeians to live outside of slavery, first within the buccaneering economy of producing hides and leather hides and tallow, and later within backwoods communities of Monteria resistance. As Ann Eller has reminded us, in the mid-19th century, Hispaniola became an oasis of freedom within a sea of slavery as fugitives sought freedom there as slavery raged on in Puerto Rico and Cuba. Haitian anthropologist Trujillo has written eloquently about how the Haitian Revolution has been silenced due to the way that it challenged the conceptual categories of its day by equating freedom with slave emancipation. The Dominican Republic shares this heretical status with Haiti, even if it did not achieve it on the battlefield. Rather, it was achieved through a subaltern everyday culture of resistance to being governed, one that was assisted by topography, demography, and natural features of the island. The silencing and misrecognition of the DR has continued into the academy as one of the few Caribbean nations with a predominantly freedman population early on, whose first link to Europe was not sugar, which fueled the Industrial Revolution in Europe, but rather hide, which became the famed cuir de Cordoba, the famed leather panels that graced European interiors based on the extra-large cattle hides of Santo Domingo produced by the buccaneers, who were a motley crew of European indentured servants and Taino and African runaway slaves. In the 17th century, these large skins were sculpted and often gilded with gold in artisanal workshops in the Low Countries of Europe and were used as wall hangings as an alternative to tapestry and can be seen in the background of this Dutch painting, 17th century. Santo Domingo later became an important source for cacao and mahogany because its expansive forests had not been chopped down, such as those of Cuba and San Domingue, because as the sugar frontier expanded, because it was not a true sugar plantation society. What's interesting about cacao grown on Hispaniola is that it was cultivated wild by peasant producers in the forest, unlike elsewhere where it was grown in estates. Indeed, in the Dominican Republic, cocoa production actually rivaled sugar in the early 20th century as the nation became the world's largest cacao supplier in 1906. And of course, today it's the #1 organic, high, quality chocolate producer in Latin America. Also, San Domingo mahogany continued to be a premier brand in Chippendale furniture and into the early 20th century, because the arts and crafts movement cherished its deep color. What's different about these products, leather, cacao, and mahogany, from other Atlantic commodities, that they were not produced by slave labor, even if at times cuir de Cordoba hides were embossed at times with black slaves. The difference was part of the impetus of putting together the Dominican Republic Reader to make the peculiarities of the Dominican Republic intelligible to the world. It was intended to help others understand the specificities of the DR through translating key Dominican voices and making available some historical and diplomatic materials that are very revealing of the DR's particular history. My current research commenced as an oral history project that sought to make sense of the profusion of animals in Haitian and Dominican popular culture. Popular shape-shifting tales about people turning into animals such as cattle, pigs, dogs, and horses. Thus, the uncanny baka, an infernal cousin of the zombie. Animals which are seen in contemporary ghost sightings and sorcery practices from the period of early colonization to the present across the island. Much of my fieldwork has taken place in the frontier town of Manica, Elias Pina, where I've been visiting since 2008. I argue that the animal referent in these narratives is not accidental, since these were the animals brought by Columbus, which were used to subjugate the Taino population and then the African slaves, and have now been transformed into spirit demons. The horse was particularly terrifying, since Hispaniola's large indigenous population, the largest indigenous animal on the island was a large rodent. So these large cattle and horses especially were terrifying. The specter of the Spaniard on horseback was extremely terrifying and rumored to be a centaur, a man fused with his mount. Horses also enabled the mass slaughter of indigenes and trained attack canines, which were used to track runaway slaves. And pigs' rooting practices ate indigenous tuber crops and contributed to famine. So this project has sought to link the real history of animals on the island with tales of demonic apparition, of encounters with cows that cry, encounters with phantasmic habali, feral pig specters, which no longer exist. These stories, on the one hand, are testimonies of witnessing, and thus of mourning and melancholia, since these animals, which long sustained the poor, are now extinct. Yet they're also picaresque trickster tales of virile men narrowly escaping supernatural danger. These animals, pigs, cattle, horses, and dogs, have become gateways to the supernatural, appearing in some of the most powerful sorcery practices on the island, which one might need in the extreme, an event of extreme illness, or if you need a U.S. visa. Thus, I argue that these stories are not just about nature, they're also about history. These are tales of hybrid humans, as well as non-human codependency, since animals also sustain the freedman population and their ability to remain outside of slavery through a feral animal hunting commons. To conclude, The Cold War ushered in an era of globalization as well as disposability, as petrochemical pollutants, heavy metals, and plastics inaugurated what Delugree calls new techno-fossils that do not biodegrade. It seems fitting then to end with a reminder that we need absolutely to make public and study the archives, which shine the light of day on processes of imperial violence. Yet we must also not overlook the hauntings of creatures hidden in the shadows that conjure the experience of the violence of colonialism and imperialism, and that has rendered the poor today what anthropologist Mary Douglas termed social dirt or matter out of place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. That was amazing. To speed things up, I'm going to present our next speaker, Doctora Ramona Hernandez. Doctora Hernandez is someone I know since I was 18 years. I think I was 18 years. I started as a volunteer at the Dominican Studies Institute. And she's been a mentor and an advisor all the way since. Doctora Ramona Hernandez is director of the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute and is professor of sociology both at the City College of New York and at the Grad Center. She specializes in migration with a focus on people of Dominican descent in the U.S., on the mobility and incorporation of migrant workers, and on the restructuring of the world economy and its effect on working class people. Doctora Hernandez is the author of The Mobility of Workers Under Advanced Capitalism, Dominican Migration to the United States, published by Columbia University, 2002. It won Choice's Outstanding Academic Title in 2003. She also co-authored La República Dominicana y la Prensa Extranjera, Mayo 1961, Septiembre 1963, desde la desaparición de Trujillo hasta Juan Bosch, published by Biblioteca Nacional Pedro Enríquez Ureña, 2013. These are only among her many publications. Under Doctora Hernandez's leadership, the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute has evolved into a bona fide leading institute of research with a national and international reputation that has expanded the line of academic inquiries by producing pioneering research on the area of Dominican Latino studies. And soon, the Dominican Studies Institute will enter a formal partnership and collaboration with the Opening the Archives Dominican Republic project, which will give City College students the opportunity to serve as researchers in the Washington, D.C. archives. So please welcome Doctora Hernandez.
Sí. Buenas noches. Antes de empezar, René, yo quisiera que le trajéramos los audífonos de traducción. Yeah. I'm sorry, but I'm going to take part of my time to arrange for that. And as we do that, you know, it's the protocol in New York to recognize, to acknowledge members of the electoral body that are present in here. And I need to acknowledge, to recognize Carmen Castillo, que está aquí con nosotros y que es miembro del Consejo Municipal de aquí de Providencia. City Councilwoman, Carmen Castillo. Thank you for coming, Carmen. And of course, the other representative is chairing the panel with us. This is a protocol and for where I come from, so I have to do that as part of that. I have a couple of students that that have followed me, and I'm so pleased that they are here. They're no longer student, they're professor, but I had to say, I had to take, ¿cómo se dice, no? Darme pompa, because, City, where are you, City? There she is. She was a student of mine at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Ya tiene sus cosas. La tiene puesta, le están, okay. And I have to say that City finished her PhD at Berkeley. So that was one of the, como se dice, éxito mío, no? I remember also sending a student to the London School of Economics from University of Massachusetts. So, qué bueno, muchas gracias por venir, ¿no? Vamos a ver. Buenas noches. Thank you for inviting me to speak this evening, particularly René Cordero, a graduate student in the history department here at Brown, who comes from the City College of New York and the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute. I had to tell you that I have been operated 2 weeks ago of glaucoma on my right eye, so I don't see well, y como que me voy de vez en cuando, so an apology for that, but I have to be here. I have to be here, and this is why I came. Of course, I am grateful to Dr. Green as the creator of this project for his vision of expanding the research to include the Dominican Republic and for inviting the Dominican Studies Institute at the City College to be part of this wonderful initiative. I am going to begin my show by showing the state of the scholarship covering the Dominican Republic during the years between 1961 and 1990. Dígame una cosa, René, ¿esto es un pointer?
Usted le da ahí.
Espérese,
Exactamente.
vamos a ver.
Así mismo.
Ok, y esto es un pointer, ¿verdad? A ver, espérese,
No,
espérese,
no creo que
espérese.
es un pointer. Este es el pointer.
Este es el pointer.
Yo creo que sí, ¿eh?
Vamos a ver, espérese, vamos
Ajá,
por
míralo
partes.
ahí.
¿Sí? ¿No? ¿Está bien? ¿Estamos bien? So, the state of the scholarship covering the Dominican Republic during the years between 1961 and 1990. What has been written? These are texts published in the United States. I searched for scholarship produced up to this year, in 2019. And the list excludes publications dealing with Dominican migration to the United States and Trujillo dictatorship. These are very specific, and of course, I felt that it was going to be much more accurate if I excluded those two. The interesting thing that we see here is that this is all of the writings published since 61 to 1990. 105 sources only. Pero things become more complicated. Let's see. Oh, no, espérate, esto no es. Espérate. ¿Qué pasó? Espera, ya aquí ya lo tengo. Things become more complicated. So the books that we had originally there, 6 and 10 of the books cover the Dominican Republic from a comparative perspective. So the Dominican Republic is not the actual subject, but it's the Dominican Republic with another, with Guatemala, with Peru, with Nicaragua, and so on. And the same thing happened with the 26 articles that we have there. 40% of those 26 articles, it's also comparative analysis. Very little has been written, is what I'm saying, from the scholarship perspective regarding those years. So in here we are emphasizing the importance of the archives. By excluding, these years are important because they intersect with profound transformations affecting the world during what has been classified as the Cold War period. It is also important to know that during these years, the Dominican people in the United States transformed from birds of passage, in the words of Marco Pior, into a community that planted roots in the U.S. As such, a new history has been unfolding that involves the place where Dominican migrants were born and the society where their children and their children's children had been born, a society where Dominicans are settled for good. Understanding these years, or those years, is important because they are the foundation of a new era, a new historiography for the United States and the Dominican Republic. Let me show you some indicators of the changes that have occurred in the United States with regards to the Dominican people during the same years that the archives cover. Vamos a ver si puedo con esto. This is the growth of the Dominican population here in the United States. I don't have 1960, but you will see it in a minute. Beautiful, healthy, over 2 million people of Dominican descent here how did we get there? Oh, this is when the Dominican Studies Institute was created, and this is my stuff. They do these kinds of things, right? Yay. So from the first, again, and this is the kinds of research that we do at the Dominican Studies Institute, with the first immigrant that settled in New York City. And what is New York City? What is Manhattan today? 1613, one Dominicano that has been documented, to the over 5,000 Dominicans who came through Ellis Island, right? And this is a book that I have on the contract with Columbia University Press, writing about those people. To the one, at this point, when this was done in 17, it was 1 million something Dominican. And as you can see, the majority of them is the 1965 time, which is the moment that are covered in the archives. And this is the migration. These are people, part of the growth that we saw before. It had to do with Dominicans coming from the Dominican Republic. And these are people who came with their green cards only. This does not include visitors. This does not include turista y estudiante y qué sé yo. So impressive, right? But the growth also is connected. Yo creo que me favor. Okay, as the Dominican population grew, it also transformed with a more mature population, longer resident in the U.S., and we will see this in a minute, increasing rates of U.S. citizenship, increasing U.S.-born population, increasing internal mobility, or moving into communities where other Latinos and others are the majority, and also increasing their educational share. These are the transformations that are happening right here during those years. And remember the writing that we saw, this is almost nowhere to be found. Here, what I wanted to show you is that maturity, the maturity of the Dominican population. If you look at this, let's see, vamos a ver. Over 50% of the Dominican people that we have here have been here for over 30 years already. So it's a settled, mature community. Right? And you have the years in there, and you can think about that. But this is the other piece of that very large, beautiful line that we saw. As we mature, the Dominican people has been transforming from immigrant to U.S. born. Beautifully. That has serious implications for who we are as a people here, and for the Dominican people as well in the Dominican Republic. Vamos a ver. The citizenship. You know, there is the story that Dominicans don't become citizens of the U.S. Rumores. The longer they stay, this shows that the longer they stay here, the higher the likelihood that Dominicans will become citizens of the U.S. Normal. Somos normales, ¿verdad? So it's right there. And now we are basically everywhere of the U.S. Todas partes. Estamos en todas partes. And I think I want to end this so that you see the transformation. So it's no longer in New York, ¿verdad? It's no longer the Northeast, but it's everywhere. Sí, estamos en Alaska. I do have people who email the Institute from Alaska. We actually have elected a person of Dominican ancestry in Arizona. Tenemos un oficial. Sí, no, claro, Europa, pero aquí en Estados Unidos, there is a person of Dominican ancestry that has been now elected in Arizona, ¿verdad? Entonces, this is my last one. Okay. Dominican has been doing very well when it comes to education as compared to other groups. If you look at the bachelor, let me see if I can do this with this here. You look at the bachelor's degree, for instance, and you look at Dominicans compare to Latino overall. Look how beautiful those numbers are, you know, when you compare 2010 and 2017. The Cubans are the ones that are ahead. But Dominican has been catching up. Y sabe, ¿verdad? Mírelo, mírelo. Yeah, they're running. I don't want to amargarle la fiesta. No, no le quiero amargar la fiesta. But the kind of study that we are doing now, the Dominican Studies Institute, is this one. And that is that, okay. Yeah, when the data, and I want to be very grateful to Brown because when it comes to graduate study, it seems to be that something is going on. They're now moving forward. So I'm gonna leave you with that. But these are the transformations that are happening, right? As the Dominican population grew and transformed in the US from an immigrant community into a settled rural people, Dominicans and the Dominican Republic did not stay put. They witnessed a profound transformation of their society, a transformation that included the following list of events, one after the other, all intertwined. This list includes the holding of the first democratic elections in 3 decades, and electing a new government whose ideological belief and first policies openly challenged the US position in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is important, right? This transformation also entailed an end to that government and its new ideas. Just 7 months after its election, through a coup d'etat, and of course, a civil war among Dominicans followed. The fight broke among people who profess different ideological views and struggle to lead the destiny of their country. A military intervention from the US would turn the Civil War into an international battle when Dominicans resisted and confronted the US invaders. In the end, the US peacemaker diplomats restored order, and magically Dominicans came to their senses. A new Dominican president rose to power. He, an old friend of the US, kept peace and social order by a sharp blade and by imposing a social economic system that relied on the exodus of thousands of Dominican families who are now dispersed across the world. This new government also relied on the predominating influence of the US and the Dominican Republic's economic transactions, political system, educational pedagogy, and cultural belief, with Dominicans now celebrating Thanksgiving and anxiously awaiting for Black Friday sales, as this cultural practice has always been part of their history. It's part of the transformation in the Dominican Republic that we need to reflect upon. In all of these events, whether in the US or in the Dominican Republic, there have been diplomatic relations translated into government actions. We know bits and pieces about these relations. We also have gut feelings, suspicions. We have also heard rumors. These archives, the one that we are celebrating today, provide a wonderful opportunity to clarify doubts, disentangle rumors from facts, reveal stories, perhaps of complicity between governments, of resistance from above and below, of ideological clashes, of imperial greed. These papers hold 1,001 secrets. By making these papers available, these archives provide access to an abundance of confidential matters between countries. And in doing so, these archives democratize knowledge in a concrete way. I want to conclude by opening a series of questions related to these new archives. What kinds of research and narratives will scholars around the world produce from examining these papers? What will scholars and students in the Dominican Republic find in them? But perhaps a more important question, and I'm so happy that I have young people of Dominican ancestry here, but perhaps a more important question revolves around US Dominicans, particularly among those who had been born and raised here, and for whom these archives contain evidence of their foundational history in the US. what kind of histories will US-born Dominican scholars write from documents involving the actions of a society where they have learned to speak, read, think, and become? Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez, for those wonderful numbers. Now, I want to introduce our last two speakers, which will be presenting together, and which I will dare say are my new friends in Providence. So they'll be talking about their life in Providence, but also the history of organizations in Providence, of Dominican organizations in Providence. So first, I'm going to introduce Grace Diaz, and then I'm going to introduce Juan Pichardo. Grace Diaz has been a dedicated public servant for Rhode Island's District 11 as state representative since 2004. Born in the Dominican Republic, she came to Providence in 1990 with only $40 and 2 dresses. She was determined to succeed in her new homeland for herself and for her 5 children. In 2004, she became the first Dominican American woman elected to state office in the United States history. Since then, she has fought for legislation on issues afflicting women, children, and minorities, affordable housing, education, gun restriction, fair election participation, reform for the criminal justice system, and immigration issues. The first bill she passed created an Office of Civil Rights in the Attorney General's office. In 2008, she was appointed vice chair of the Rhode Island Democratic Party, the first Latina woman in Rhode Island to serve in such a high-ranking position. She has represented Rhode Island on 3 national Democratic conventions to elect the President of the United States. During Hillary Clinton's presidential election, she received one of the biggest honors on her political career when she became one of the 4 United States presidential electors of Rhode Island to be elected to elect the President of the United States. Representative Diaz holds bachelor's and master's degree from Springfield College, which she earned in 2008 and 2010. Now I'm going to introduce Juan Pichardo. On January 7th, 2003, Juan Pichardo was sworn in as a state senator representing the 2nd senatorial district in the state of Rhode Island. Pichardo is the first Latino elected to a Senate seat in the state of Rhode Island and the first Dominican American elected to a state Senate seat in the United States. During his first weeks in office, Senator Pichardo introduced and helped pass the Nolo Contendere bill, which requires that judges inform immigrants of all the rights under the law. He arrived to the United States in 1975, and at the age of 9, lived in New York City with his mother and 2 sisters prior to moving to Providence in 1979. Since then, Juan has lived in Providence and has been actively involved in the community at different stages of his life. He has been diligently working and advocating for his district for many years, and through legislation and advocacy is addressing issues of educational reforms, economic development, quality of life, fair housing, and promotion of civic participation. He is the former commissioner of the Martin Luther King Jr. State Holiday Commission and former commissioner to Ebenezer Dexter Donation Fund. Senator Pichardo also served as a member of the Rhode Island Air National Guard from 1988 to 2010, retiring at the rank of Master Sergeant. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Rhode Island College, as well as associate's degrees in audiovisual from the Community College of the Air Force and liberal arts from the Community College of Rhode Island. Let's welcome Representative Diaz, former Senator Pichardo. I saw some people walking in. Necesitan audio para intérprete. No. Okay.
Okay. Good evening. Buenas noches. quiero oír esa palabra hermosa de buenas noches dominicano que tanto nos gusta. I'm in the perfect company because my friend, former state senator Juan Pichardo is with me tonight. But as Dr. Ramona Hernandez mentioned, that New York has protocol. Here in Rhode Island, we also have a protocol. And I want to go by that because I wanted people to know who leaders, Dominican leaders, are in the room as other elected officials who are joining us tonight. Tonight, we had the opportunity to see one of the most amazing lady in the city of Providence, who is the president of the city council. And she was here with us tonight. I think she left. Her name is Sabina Matos, who I know very well, and I was so pleased to see her tonight. Also, as was mentioned, City Council from Providence, Carmen Castillo is joining us. From Central Falls, we have Franklin Solano, dedicated Dominican man. Thank you. We also have so many leaders from the community, organizations, business, and other areas that are important in the state. So to all of you, welcome. This is a historic moment for Dominican American community, right, Senator? So I'm very, very proud to know that the Brown University has invested funds to research important State Department's documents related to U.S.-Dominican relations during the Cold War. I was 7 years old when I saw the first aircraft flying over my neighborhood. Those who born between 59 and before 50 to 70, we remember those moments. You were in Dominican, those little one. And my mother, with 3 kids, she had to rush under the brick building to avoid bombs attacks. I was too young to process the gravity of the situation. And few hours later, that was April 30, 1965, I heard the United States intervene in the Dominican Civil War with the 82nd Airborne Division learned in the San Isidro Air Base that many people know. I don't even recall how long the war was. My only memories are flashes of adult conversation about how many bodies they saw in the street or how many buildings were down. So I grew up with no official knowledge of the conflicts between the U.S. and Dominican Republic. The only thing I knew was what I read and heard from secondhand about the Cold War. So tonight, those experiences haunting me for more than decades, I was wondering to know what really happened, because at that time I couldn't understand or process that. Those experiences I brought with me to United States. I came here in 1990. I was learning from so many sources, but the most beautiful experience I have was to be engaged and embraced and welcomed by the Dominican community that was concentrated in Elmo, Washington Park, and the center of the city of Providence. Dominicans, as was mentioned by the Dr. Derby and Dr. Hernandez, is the 5th large population Hispanic origin living in the United States. We are almost 2.1 million so far, but here locally in Rhode Island, we are 52,000. Telling Tomas Avila, we are 52 now. 52,000 Dominican Americans living in Rhode Island, which is the 5% of the population. People of Dominican ancestry are beginning to have a great impact in the national stage. And I want to make local because I want to mention names that I'm so proud to be Dominican. We have the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Mr. Tom Perez. He's a second generation, but he's incredible. And I was so happy when I saw that he was elected as the chair of the National Democratic Party. Dominicans have increasingly made presence in the financial industry. Evelyn Perez, who is here, and I, we have the pleasure, and Senator Pichardo, to know Sid Wilson, and I hope many of you know him. He was ranked the #1 Wall Street financial analyst in the special retailing category by Forbes magazine. And I had the pleasure to know that he's an amazing Dominican making mark in the United States. Dominican like Oscar de la Renta, who unfortunately passed away, he was the most recognized name in the fashion industry. He was Dominican. The late Manuel Tavares Rodriguez, who was the professor emeritus of Harvard Medical School and radiologist and chief of the Massachusetts General Hospital. Can you imagine Dominican be the chief of Massachusetts Hospital? And he was known as the father of the neuroradiology. He was the one who put everything together. An expert, you will help me to know that even in the United States, not talking about the Major League Baseball, we are talking about the famous American athletes as Alex Rodriguez, Robinson Cano, David Ortiz, the Big Papi, Manny Ramirez, Bartolo Colon, and Pedro Martinez. There are no words to describe how much I personally appreciate the work done by Brown University to shed light on the important chapter in the history of the Western Hemisphere. Without the knowledge of our history, it's difficult to evaluate the present. For me, history is a huge door to the truth. But when the door remains locked, the truth also remains locked off with it. Dominican of my generation, and I see so many of you here, I see my good friend Pimentel here, grew up with many questions about why everything happened during the Civil War. But without having access to official documents, these questions remain unanswered for decades. Today, everything will be changed. Door will be open to all of us, and I thank for that. I appreciate the opportunity Brown University is offering the future Dominican generation. It's not just for us today. It's for the youth, for our children, our grandchildren. It is important to understand how the relationship between the two countries has grown and evolved over the years. I would like to thank the former Senator Pichardo, a special thank you today in front of my community, for guiding me through the political process. You was elected before me, and I appreciate all the things you went through and all the contribution you have done to the state and to the community. Thank to Dominican leaders and organizations that are writing history every single day. I want to mention Quisqueya Action, who are leading the Dominican Festival in the state of Rhode Island for more than 30 years. I'd like to mention HURO, who is the organization preserving the culture and part of the history of Dominican here. I'd like to talk about Juan Pablo Duarte, where Dominican go and play dominoes. I'd like to talk about the one organization was established by law, the Dominican Independent Heritage Award Committee, and we have the president here, Mr. Isidro de Leon, and many other members. And by the way, this organization was established by Senator Pichardo right there and myself in 2005, which was an amazing thing. I almost. Thanks to Dominican books writers, we have here Elvis Ruiz and too many others. I don't see Ana Arelis Cruz is not here. I have Franklin, who's also writing books. I have so many others. Thanks to the business community, we have here Tony Mendez, who cannot talk about the Mendez families and the state because they contribute to establishing what the Dominican do the best, business. We want to mention that we have in this room today people who survived from the Cold War. And I'd like to mention that here in this room, we have a man who lost his family, who was tortured and abused during the regime of dictator Rafael Leonidas Trujillo. I wanted you please thank him and ask I want to ask him to standing and say thank you, because even though, and despite all the struggle he was in the situation he born, in the way he came to the United States, he is sacrificing his life to preserving the culture of Dominican in the state. He's fight every day. That way we had patriotic symbols in the Royal Williams Park. I wanted you to help me to welcome from the heart and thank you, Mr. Victor Martinez. Victor Martinez, as is known in our state, he's a one man who went through the Trujillo regime. He went through Balaguer. He went through so much things that you can never imagine. And finally, I wanted to thank to my new friend, Dominican young man, who's committed to make history along with us. I want to thank you, René Cordero. You are my friend from now. You're in trouble. And you just know, my friend, you are a Dominican American community friend. And you know why? Because you put the key and open the room. That way we can have information. I want to thank to Lauren Derby, Dr. Derby. Thank you so much for the passion, the invest all the time, all the energy you have put in order to get the reliable information for the community and for the state. And you, my good friend from New York, my dear Dr. Hernandez, thank you for come to Rhode Island again and bring us more and more information that is relevant, not just for Rhode Island, for the entire country. And you, my senator, come on over here because I'm done. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
My friend and representative, my sister, Grace Diaz, Representative Grace Diaz. What a wonderful person, and also an example of how we have really grown in our community. Not just only in Providence, in the state of Rhode Island, but also in the United States, and just being here, being part of the diaspora. And so, thank you. We've come a long way. First, I would like to I'm going to provide a perspective of just of historical, in a sense of a young man and just being here and how we've grown in the past 3 or 4 decades. I want to thank Dr. Green for really being in Brown University, but really Dr. Green by working also with René Cordero in the PhD program, but also opening up this archive. Because for many years out in the community, in South Providence, Elmwood, since I got here, pretty much we have been studied. The Dominican community has been studied, and I shared this with Dr. Derby. Pretty much of this new group that came to South Providence and a lot of music and so forth. And over the years, I've learned and I've met many students, graduate students, doing their thesis, and I used to say, "That's great. We opened doors and about our communities," and I used to say, just leave us the thesis, at least a copy, so that way we can learn about what your observation was. Because often the students will graduate and then we won't see them again. And that was in the pretty much 88, 89, up to now to a certain degree. And in around 2000, we said enough, no more studying. You know, and so this bridge that you've created, Dr. Green, and it's significant for a community that has grown here in the state of Rhode Island, the city of Providence, is tremendous. I hope that, and it is our hope, through Representative Grace Diaz and those elected in this community that's here, that is going to be meaningful, that is going to be really significant. Because as we've learned over time, that this type of archive, digital in particular, technology is transforming the world, is going to save a little part of humanity. But it's been said that if you don't know your history or where you come from, you might repeat it. And we do not want to repeat what happened during the 30 years of the dictatorship of Trujillo. And so we are at a crossroad as a community, in Rhode Island, in the United States, but also in the Dominican Republic. There's a lot. And so I want to thank you, René, for really connecting with us and knowing that you have that natural connection with Ramona, Doctora Ramona Hernandez, because I've known her since as a young man trying to find a definition and find my place here in the United States and growing up from New York City in Washington Heights, being proud Washington Heights. Then now South Providence, Elmwood, which I now reside with my kids, to define what is my role here in the United States. I know that all around me in my adult life, or young life, we used to hear that I'm only here for 10, 20 years, and then I'm going to back to the Dominican Republic. That's what I used to hear from adults growing up. Then over the years, that changed. I knew in some ways that I wasn't going back. Till now that I realize that I do come from an island that is the paradise. That we kind of, in the United States, we look for this place that it brings us serenity, a lot of sun and peacefulness. And guess what? We'll come from the Dominican Republic. And when things settle down, we know that things progress over time through its tribulation. We will be that place where we can go back and visit and live there. And I think that the generation that has been growing here in the United States, and particularly in Providence, sees that. When we go back, we are a community that love our country, our people. We've seen it as we grow a generation of immigrants, but also our kids. We maintain our relationship with our family. We don't forget. We love our family. We love our country. And so over the time, it impresses me to understand and read, and now with YouTube, understand the struggles of what it meant to be under Trujillo dictatorship. And then the struggle that we as a country continue to have. We are a young democracy. We are only 53, 54-year-old democracy. So we continue to understand and go through the struggle. Right now in the Dominican Republic is going through another transformation as government and technology and as the political system grows. We are living in a historical times in the Dominican Republic, and that needs to be studied, understand from an international perspective, but also for Dominicans. And that is the key role that Brown University in this project, the Digital Archives, is going to play with my kids, with the generation that is coming right after us, and the present. So when I see the numbers of the Dominicans that are in the United States now, close to, 2 million, almost 2 million. Back in 1985, 89, when I actually met Dr. Ramona Hernandez at UMass, I was just probably 18, and she was like 19, we're very young. And now Dr. Ramona Hernandez, and I've seen the transformation from New Jersey, from Miami, New York, Massachusetts, and here, is that what impresses me is that in the past 3 decades, we were at the bottom in terms of education, and we continue to struggle as Dominicans here abroad in the United States. But to see the numbers that the community college, that number has increased 75% fold. Then it moves on to a bachelor's degree, and that has doubled. And we need to do a lot of work. I hope that through this effort, Brown University, get more graduate students and also PhD students in these institutions. And that is significant because it's an economic engine for our city, our state, and even the Dominican Republic, because they look up to us, to institution Ivy League schools like these and non-Ivy League schools for knowledge and for that wisdom that could bring more peace and tranquility to Paradise Island, Dominican Republic. So at the end of the day, I appreciate Dr. Green, René, Dr. Derby, I'm going to have to find your book because to a certain degree, you inspire me more and more, including my representative, Grace Diaz, because we've seen each other grow so much without creating roadblocks that everyone can succeed. When you have a woman like my mother, a pioneer, that is represented through Grace Diaz or Carmen Castillo or Sabina Matos and many others, Jacinta, etc., that you come here with no education, formal education, because everybody is educated in the Dominican Republic, is that they can achieve the degrees, the life, and earn and raise their kids to become professional. There is tremendous hope. There's tremendous hope for the Dominican Republic, and this is going to play a tremendous part because the true partnership that we are going to build, it's going to be very impactful. And for those of you who are non-Dominican that are studying, obviously you're here because you're either in a class or doing a research project, what intrigues you, or Latin American studies or international affairs. I think that, one, you have a tremendous opportunity because what you know of Providence, you may know this side of Providence, but you're welcome to the South End and the West End. We have wonderful Juan Pablo Duarte Boulevard, Broad Street. We have tremendous restaurants that you can come and enjoy. So at the end of the day, we're all a community, and this very hopeful for our communities. And thank you very much, René and Dr. Green. All right.
Before we go off to Q&A, kind of just want to recap with a question. And maybe as you don't have to answer it now, of course, but as you go home and think about this conference, maybe as a question that could sum up what we've been trying to deliver is that why is it the Dominican Republic in both academic and non-academic circles, why does it continue to be an understudied topic despite such importance as a geography of historical analysis? So think about that, and I want to open up the floor to questions. Of course, please, yeah. Professor Jim Green, by the way.
The Opening the Archive project started in 2012, and we were very lucky after our first year to receive an anonymous donation of a Brazilian woman who was so impressed by a newspaper article she read that she sent me an email when I was in Brazil and said, "How do I give you $50,000 to this project?" And I thought it was like a joke. And I wrote back, "That's so nice. Why are you so generous?" And she said, "Well, because I have resources, I want to share them." And she has continued to support our work. And so actually we need to thank our anonymous donator, who is an Orisha special person for us, protecting us today. And then one day she said, "Okay, we're doing Brazil. I want to do the rest of Latin America." And I went, "That's like 1 billion documents in the archives. We can't do that." So I thought, Uruguay, that's small, or the Dominican Republic. And so I said, what about doing the Dominican Republic? And one of the reasons I wanted to do that is because the Brazilian government, after the military came to power in 1964, was the part of the international force that invaded the Dominican Republic in 65. And so that connection was important for us to keep in mind, that this was not just an American invasion, but unfortunately other countries collaborated, authoritarian governments collaborated in that. And then René came to Brown University, and I said, "I have a project for you to do." So this is very much a part of the spirit of Brown University. Grace Diaz is now remembering me from an event we organized many years ago here when she talked about being a young girl during the invasion. I remember that story. And when I was the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, first thing I asked, how many Latinos are in Providence and who are they? And someone said, the Dominicanos, and I said, that's our first area of work. And so when I was the director, we started that, and now we have another person from the Caribe, Patsy Lewis, who is continuing this concern for thinking of Latin America and the Caribbean as a whole, and we're very happy for that. So I wanted to thank you all for being here tonight. This is a project we want to really strengthen and make it bigger and sustain itself over the years. I'm praying that our donor will continue to give us money every year so we can do that. We're very excited about the collaboration with the CUNY. The Institute for Dominican Studies is fundamental for the people of the Dominican Republic here in the United States, and Ramona Hernandez, who also came many years ago to our university, has been a pioneer in that regard. So I want to thank you all for this work, and I'm extremely proud that Brown University brings graduate students like René to this. We have amazing undergraduates from the Dominican Republic here who are working on our project here tonight. Thank you very much, everyone. So René ran out of the room, so any questions, and I'll field the questions. So 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Green, and also René Cordero. He's not here right now.
There he is. He's going to take over.
Oh,
I'm in the back.
Oh, basically, I just want to thank you, Brown University. This is a great undertaking. This is a very important milestone for our community because it will preserve history. And I heard you speaking in the radio station this morning, you are very eloquent. And I would like to know what is the plan from now on to bring awareness to our community, about this important project. So I just want to know, what do you have in plan in terms of reaching out to our community?
Yeah. What's your name?
Elvis.
Elvis. And he has a question too. I'm going to take this question, I'm going to take that question, because catering told me that they have to clean up by 7:30, and I want you guys to eat. So we're just going to take one more question. ¿La puedo preguntar en español? A ver.
Un millón de gracias, René. Yo tengo 43 años aquí. Entonces yo me voy a poner a servicio. Yo tengo, ya que están hablando de documentos, yo tengo documentos valiosísimos, escritos de presidente, de asesino, de Alicinio Peña Rivera, cuando estaban hablando a eso, de puño y letra. ¿Qué debo yo hacer? Tengo un sinnúmero, una colección de monedas antiquísimas también. Sí, tenía como 3.000 monedas de Santo Domingo, la doné en Santo Domingo, me quedan como 4.000 ahí. ¿Qué debo yo hacer para poner al servicio de ustedes?
Déjeme contestar esta pregunta primero, porque ahí podemos hablar entre la doctora Hernández y usted, y quizás podemos hablar más informalmente sobre esta colección que tiene para hacerle su entrevista y hacerle el proceso para la donación si usted desea. Pero quédese para hablar de eso.
He has a question too.
My question is actually very similar to the gentleman here, Elvis, maybe just the other side of it. Oftentimes, Brown University does these sensational projects, and they tend to stay, they stay here, right? They stay here. So, but I work in the community, and so I want to know how do folks, even who are not Dominican, how have y'all envisioned that they can use this archive, learn, contribute to it, and use it for actual social change, rather than just being like a drum?
This is exactly what we were talking about, Grace and Juan. We sat down about 3 weeks ago, and we actually came up with a plan.
Okay.
And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to, once this is by the spring, and maybe by even the fall, we're going to allow public school students to use the archive in order to write their final papers, in order to engage with the archive. Even, I was talking to the commissioner, the state educated commissioner that was brought in today, Angelica Green. And one of the things we want to do is actually workshop the opening the archives to parents and students in the education system. And so to be used as a curriculum development, right? One of the curriculum developments that now appears is choices. I don't know if you guys hear about choices. Choices makes all, so there's a lot of plans for the future that it's not going to only stay at Brown University, but it's actually going to have material, tangible effects for high school students, both Dominican and everybody, right? Yeah. Unfortunately, we're going to have to continue the conversation as we eat, because I really want you guys to have some food. So, yeah, give a round of applause to everyone.